Hello, my friend. We're at it again.
We're at it again. How's everything in America? In great
Uh,
old America.
yeah, things are heating up again. Unfortunately, it don't see. I'm, it's people used to think I was nutty that I wanted to talk about anti-Semitism and Jews. Like enough with the Jews already. Enough with, and I also didn't care about writing about Jews and anti-Semitism. It's not a sexy topic that people want to talk about, but behind it, getting to unity is getting to a better life. It seems like it's a critical piece. Um, But interesting now, all this Kanye Ye stuff in the news. The Black Israelites, I think they're called, in the news. Um, the guys who just met with Trump the other day, Fuentes, in the news. It brings to the surface these conversations again, which is good because otherwise they don't come to the surface. The problem is that no one's really dealing with the root issue. The other
Right.
side is just like, don't say that. You can't say that. It's anti-Semitic if you say that. And they kind of expose the wound. There's an opportunity to heal it, and then it's kind of missed in the
Well, it's
mainstream.
tough. I mean, the experience is not great. Granted, it usually doesn't end well for certain group. So I can understand
It's
people
getting hot in the
are.
kitchen.
Yeah, exactly. They're not overly excited to talk about it. But I think on our side of the world, it's also been interesting. The World Cup started, and on the one hand, it's like the statistics show that this is the best time for humanity. Whenever there's a World Cup, like everybody kind of just calms down and goes to watch soccer. I don't know about the war in Ukraine, but other than that particular conflict and maybe some couple other places that they just everyone else just calms down. There's like a decline in crimes and domestic
Yeah.
violence. Everything just goes down, which is great. But it's in Qatar, and obviously the Israelis went there, the Israeli television, and they've been met with a wave of um, hate, I guess, of animosity.
Hmm.
It was not the kind of the welcome that they expected. They
From the
thought it
Abraham
was going to be more
Accords. Yeah.
more more sportsmanlike. Like okay, we're playing soccer, leave everything aside. It seems like it got into, I don't know if it's the setting or whatever, but it seems like it got under
It's
the
hot there, so maybe everybody's just.
maybe.
What drives you? I mean, is it some love for Jewish people?
Our guest today, he's an unlikely activist against anti-Semitism.
Antisemitism, as I said, it created a heritage right at the center of the most important human links.
That is the issue.
Many of them feel that the only way is to just exit everything, leave the religion, leave the culture.
Look at the Jews for a second critically. What do you see as the problem within the Jewish people?
Well, give us the answer, Hussein.
Like, listen, I figured it out. This is how history happened, and this is what's going to happen.
His name is Hussein, and he lives in D.C. A warm welcome.
The Jew saw them all, beat them all, and is now what he always was. All things are mortal but the Jew. All other forces pass, but he remains. What is the secret of his immortality?
I grew up in Cairo. And Egypt, sadly, first of all, we're talking about the largest Arab country, population over 100 million, probably 110, 115 today. Egypt also was the first modern Arab society and one of the first modern Muslim societies. So if you go to the history of modernity, you'll find that it was basically Egypt that was at the forefront of adopting modern Western technology since the 19th century, modernizing their education system, and so on. This is why Egypt, all the older generations know this. I don't know how much the younger generations know any of this, but Egypt was the leader, kind of considered to be the cultural America of the so-called Arab world, and actually a big part of the Muslim world. And this is why even a lot of the major ideologies in the Middle East and all of the Muslim world, which is a third of humanity, actually originated in Egypt. Let's say the Muslim Brotherhood, very famous movement. They started in Egypt, really. So Egypt is a major country in its historical and cultural way. And sadly, it's actually anti-Semitism is one of the worst in Egypt. I would say it's on a popular level, you will find it worse in Egypt than in Iran, despite that
Wow.
politically it's different.
Right. And just so people know, Egypt was the first Arab country to sign a peace treaty with Israel in 1978. So interesting how.
Yeah. So yeah, I grew up there. It's really became a part of the fabric of Egyptian reality, a cornerstone of religious identity, national identity. And all of these countries, specifically in the Middle East, they have, as everybody knows, it's not the Middle East anymore, but it started in the Middle East. They have identity problems, right? Now the entire world have identity problems, but really the Middle East have been suffering for identity problems for a century, right? You know, are we Muslim? Are we Arab? Are we Egyptians? Kind of the same thing also amongst the Palestinians, right? All the people in the region, they have these identities. But you'll find that all of those identities, like they fight over everything, right? They are really antagonistic towards each other, but all of them agree on anti-Semitism, on the hostility towards Israel. So yeah, I grew up with it. It was really part of, you know, how I think about the world, how I think about myself in my childhood.
That was in the 90s, 80s, 90s?
That was in the 90s. Yeah, that was in the 90s. It got significantly worse in the early 2000s. So, because if you remember the early 2000s, you had the second Intifada, right? You had the 9/11, the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan. There were a lot of major politically inflammatory events. Also, the rise of Al Jazeera was also during that time. That's when Al Jazeera really became the star it did.
Yeah.
So that was a huge radicalizing moment. I mean, you can see again the reprinting. So the Protocols of Zion, Mein Kampf, all of these, it's always been known that they exist, you know, widely in the Arab world.
Again, just for people who don't know about that part of history, it was really only a few years after the Oslo Accord when people thought, well, oh, hey, we're all talking, we're shaking hands, we're going to be, you know, we're going to have, you know, peace, you know, forever. Right. So then all that
it's
happens.
true. And the people who are, I would say, scholars who are not so scrupulous, or they are not really sympathetic to Israel anti-Semitism, they usually like to do a spin. Like they explain the re-rise of the intensification of anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism in the Middle East by the failure of Oslo Accords. Well, it's because the Israelis really didn't honor the Oslo Accords. But anyways, I don't see it that way. But yeah, the rise of Islamic international jihadism was also the same time. So really, anti-Semitism during that time really intensified, and I got deeply interested in it. Not in anti-Semitism itself. I was interested in the fact that, you know, I'm living in a Lord of the Rings movie, and there are like this, you know, Mordor, you know, the land of darkness, you know, ruled by this evil Lord Sauron that we have to destroy. It's just a fascinating reality.
Do people realize? Oh, sorry, go ahead, Leo.
No, just funny sound note. He's telling the story. My first year in the army, when I was serving in Israel, I was reading the Lord of the Rings, the English book, like this, you know, massive tome. So I find it nice how you know, weaved it in effortlessly. Yeah, go ahead, Seth.
Did people understand? Did they understand at that time, like you're talking about this Mordor thing, that the Jews are like this tiny minority, or is the concept that it's this huge power?
A huge power, yeah.
So they think that there's billions of them or something, or
the quantitative is not really a question, and I don't think it works in that way. Like anti-Semitism, it's just the anti-Semitic imagination. It doesn't really work in the you know, in facts and numbers and attempts at measurements. It's
a bit irrational. No, we saw it.
It is, yeah. It's very it claims to be I mean, by the end of the day, it's a rational construct. Based on symbols and abstract concepts, you know, like, you know, power, world domination. These are abstractions by the end of the day. But yeah, and then I really got into it because as I said, it's just fascinating, right? I mean, if you really live in, like, if you really believe that you live in some scenario like this, Lord of the Rings, the best thing that you can do is actually engage with it. It's big drama, right? It's the most dramatic event in history.
Life meaning.
It gives life meaning,
and people join gangs and all that kind of stuff.
and I love drama, and I've always loved drama. I mean, you can tell probably by my own setting. I love drama. I love arts. So it was really the best thing I could do is just to engage with this. You turn on the TV and you have like Al Jazeera with slow motion pictures of Palestinian children being shot at by Israelis. You remember Muhammad al-Durra?
Yeah.
Very dramatic, right? So I really got into it and went online for years, obsessively just Googling and learning everything I could about Jews, about Israel, about Judaism. And just, of course, it's a long story, but to cut it short, just eventually it transformed the way I think about everything.
Huh. Your whole story, I mean, we could get into it more. Anyone who's interested, you have a book, if you want to plug it real quick, or it's a book.
Sure. It's the book is on Amazon. It's called Minority of One.
So
the
we don't want
an Arab Mind.
Sorry, we don't want to waste all our time. Not waste, but we don't want to go over everything that everyone can learn about you there. But it's it's like amidst a whole ocean. There's like, I'm sure you're not the only person who had a transformation, but amidst an ocean, there's, it's very hard to change when you're,
Right.
In an environment that's constantly your education, your family, everything's feeding you.
Right.
Did the transformation all of a sudden, was it like a slow thing? Like, wait a second, something doesn't make sense here? Or was it just in one day, something kind of switched in your heart or your mind that made you want to
Ask
look
different
at it?
questions, maybe.
Yeah. No, it was definitely slow. So it was very residual, and there was a lot of resistance. That is, I resisted it for a very long time. But I think that happens with a lot of actually social change processes, that basically it's very slow, it's very gradual, but towards the end, then it starts happening suddenly, right? But that suddenly is deceptive. It's not really suddenly, it's a culmination of a long process.
We call it the electricity meter, right? When there's like a tiny little wheel that's like turning, right? And then eventually, after a lot, the slightly bigger wheel goes like, and then when that one does, a whole rotation, the bigger one. So when the bigger one clicks, you're like, oh my God, when did that happen? No, you just didn't see the little one going.
Yeah.
But that's how it is in everything, right? But it happened when you were there, or at what point?
It happened when I was there. I mean, that's why I call it Minority of One, because it was really lonely. And just by the time that I started thinking about those things differently, I realized that the gap, just the gap in my head, in my the way I think, between me and the people around me, was just huge. It was very hard even to try to communicate. So it was extremely difficult. And eventually, I had to leave.
Where did the power or the fuel to keep going on that line come from? Because there's no reason why you should do, unless you fell in love with some Israeli girl or something like that. There's no, or you fell in love with some concept about reality or about life that was in there. I mean, it's like, you could love, Man City, and you live around Man United fans or something like, and then you kind of, but here, I'm just as a soccer reference, football reference, but what pushes you?
Lord of the Ring, Seth.
Lord of the Ring, sorry. What drives you in that? What did you see that there? I mean, is it some love for Jewish people? Is it some, maybe we're looking at this wrong, or maybe there's something to these people?
I don't think it has to be one motivation, right? It can be multiple things. And also those motivations can change. I think motivation often change, and you grow motivations that you didn't have before. Actually, it's this point is one of the things that made me sympathetic to rabbinical legalism. That they emphasize many times the legalism over the motivation, and the motivation will come later. I think there's something to that, because I honestly it was really just wanting to know. I just wanted to know. And once I started discovering that, for the best reference for this, everybody uses it, you're living in a matrix, pretty much, like none of this actually real. Then you have to know what is real. I mean, you can't go on in anything else in your life if you really think that you're living in some sort of a fantasy. So it started really with the human urge just to really know what is going on, who am I, what's happening. And I think during the path, then I started to develop other motivations. I liked Israel, I liked the Jewish people, but I really developed the personal connection with the Jewish people after I moved to the United States and actually met Jews and lived with Jews and started to develop relations with the Jewish community. That of course developed a real motivation of that. There's also the motivation of caring about where I came from. I care about Egypt. I care about Arabs. I care about Muslims, and I'm aware of how destructive this way of thinking is. It's completely destructive, and really, I believe it led on spirals of self-destruction in the Middle East that you can see today happening in Libya, Syria. Ironically, all the scholars who deal with Middle Eastern politics, they don't mention this at all, as if anti-Semitism is not a determining factor in the political and social organization of these societies. So I also care about these societies, and they care about their future, and they care about helping them develop a healthy way to see themselves, understand themselves, because not just it's self-destructive, because of the intensity and just how the pervasiveness of antisemitism, as I said, whether in the national identity, so because of the developments in the last 2 decades, I think people develop the habit, who are familiar with the Middle East or have anything to do, of blaming it squarely on Islamism or on religion, thinking like, well, okay, Islam, and it's an easy target, right? Especially Islamists, they dress different, they look funny, so it's an easy to, which I'm not sympathetic to them at all, but it's actually that's not true. Often I find a lot of Arab secularists are even worse than many Islamists. So the pervasiveness makes it not just destructive. I feel that a lot of young people today, and there are many young people, young Arabs and Muslims, who really don't want to live like this anymore. They don't want to live in societies that are failing. They don't want to live with identity structures that seems hostile to the world. Many of them feel that the only way is to just exit everything, leave the religion, leave the culture, leave it completely, and jump into the new international. There is today an international identity of international atheism, progressive people. You can be from any urban middle class around the world. It's open to you. And a lot of them do that. And I started seeing that. And while it's definitely a better option than sorry.
No, I was just saying, but there are a ton of pitfalls there as well. It's not like
there are a ton of,
it's almost like from the frying pan to the fire, almost.
It's true, and living in the West in the past 10 years, I've seen the dangers of that too, and the directions it's headed.
Well, what are the dangers of that? Also, just if you can touch on that for a second.
Can I get there after I just finish this point? Yeah. So I saw that happening, and now I have also the motivation to try to help save Arab culture, try to help Islam, even though I personally don't believe in Islam. I don't think it's the monstrous religion that everybody understood it to be in those last few decades, and they think it's a great religion and has had a huge presence in human history. And I think there are ways, there are paths to be Arab and to be Muslim in different ways. That's not hostile to the world. That's not, and the Abraham Accords definitely showed that in practice in a country like the UAE. So that's also another motivation that I have. Now, the new international atheism, there are many pitfalls. I mean, we can talk about this also for an hour.
Yeah.
Probably hours. But first of all, it's a transnational identity, right? It's even post-national. So it's an ideology that is hostile to all particularities, even though that it's nominally it celebrates diversity. Cultural and religious diversity are almost symbolic, right? They're really hollowed out of any particular content, ideological particular content, moral content, right? So you can use a religious symbol but substitute its original ideological content with a new progressive content. You see this with I don't know what's your position, but basically making something like Tikkun Olam to be about recycling, right? You see this process. Making hijab about, well, it's about feminism, and that's basically, so you have something.
Right. There's not, I will put my own meaning into my own individual identity.
I'll put my own meaning. Yeah.
What's that quote from the? It's my leather jacket is a symbol of my unique individualism. I don't know if you guys saw the film, but it's like that.
Yeah. It's like that. It deconstructs societies. It deconstructs individuals.
And this is where it meets us a little bit. It tries really hard to move away from the natural constructs that have been around forever and are still here, but they're trying really hard to break those. Like, all the little things that basically work in nature. You see, like,
so you become totally detached from the natural things where it all kind of originated.
Like male and female, like family, like all those things that are just at the base of everything. Like all of nature works this way. No, but I have some ideas that are at least 2 years old, and I'm gonna make the whole world change, to fit them. It's like,
and it really eviscerate like human life from meaning completely. And it's really the alternatives that it offers. I do not think they're good. So the way I see it is that this new international thing that's happening, it started Western, but now it became like everything else. It's global, really. So atheism, first of all, it's very atheistic, radically atheistic in its presuppositions, which is, I have nothing against atheists, but there are problems with this level of radical atheism, that the kind of the negation of all possibilities of transcendental values.
By the way, that is the issue. The only value of having a certain of a quality that's above you, higher than you, already makes you to kind of take stock of yourself and who you are. If you remove that, like there's nothing. Like, why even bother with anything? Or why do anything in a way?
Yeah. So, and atheism is just like, sadly, the problem with the Palestinian identity. It's a negationist identity. It's an identity that does not affirm anything. It's an identity based on negation.
That's against.
So the meaning that it attempts to offer through eroticism, through a apocalyptic, ecological apocalypticism, radical social justice. So it has these ideological kind of tools set to offer you meaning if you need meaning. Well, if you need meaning, you can fight for radical social justice, eroticism, ecological collapse, scientism or technologism. For example, Yuval Harari is kind of the guru of technologism. Technology gives us meaning, and I think all of these things ultimately are false. They falsify the human experience.
Jordan Peterson called this a Mephistophelian, Machiavellian ideology of living. It's true.
What would you say? It does what to the human experience?
It creates a false experience. That is, you live in a false experience that does not really, because ideologies, by the end of the day, they do create cartoons of reality. Now, the problem with these ideologies specifically, they are the narrowest kinds of ideology probably that we've had as human societies, because they focus on specifically one very narrow human issue.
It's almost like the exact diametrical opposite version of your book. It's like a majority of one. Your book is a minority of
it's a majority of one. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah,
it's interesting. So and so here we are, and I think actually as bleak as things are, we also like to, we kind of give credit to nature and how nature works, and nature is always kind of engaged in this dance between the opposing forces and eventually seeking the homeostasis, the balance. And I think that in many respects, this is sort of a really extreme reaction to just kind of like all the old structures. They weren't great, but they were kind of bogging people down. They were also kind of constricting and limiting this development of humanity, and so you have this reaction to it. So I don't think the old wasn't working. This new is as you said, it's mostly a negation of that old. but it's time of change. It's a time of it's a great time for introducing new ideas, for kind of reviewing what's not working and looking into different solutions. And that's exactly where we find ourselves, and where we sort of insert ourselves into the conversation, because we're saying, and we want to hear a bit more about the anti-Semitism in the Arab world, and even the stuff that we mentioned in the beginning about the stuff that's happening in Qatar and all that. Like, it's, all this is boiling to the surface. But in a way, what we're saying is also the way Jews in Israel, Jews in the United States, mostly these two big locales of Jews, have been dealing with anti-Semitism for the past 2-3 decades, is simply it's not working. So whatever they were doing was not working, and that kind of what pushed us to go out and try to look for a solution. And we figured if we find the systemic root of this problem, maybe we can offer a systemic solution. And it might be a crazy solution, but maybe it's something worth at least experimenting with, trying, because everything else is simply not working. All these ambassadors and trying to change public opinion and trying not, let's not talk about it, or let's ban this and sue that and do the other stuff. And that's where we come from, kind of trying to look at a different approach to this. And we're trying to base that on our observations of, you could say, nature, human nature throughout history. That's sort of where we come from. And before we kind of maybe dive into that, maybe it would be great to know a little bit more about what's the general, if you can kind of give a listener who's not familiar with the Middle East today, what's the general kind of sense, the sentiment, if you can give a reading of that, of the Middle Eastern sentiment, even extending as far as Iran, if you want, towards the whole issue with Jews, with Israel. Where's that? Paint
I
a picture.
There are positive developments that happened, I think, in the Middle East in the last decade, and I think the most important of them is kind of the breakdown of the monolithic conception of an great Arab nation, or the Arab world, or so on. I think it will be very hard to generalize. Middle Eastern societies are different societies at different stages of development, and also they do have particular. Yes, they share language and religion, but they do have also their own particular local circumstances.
Right.
So it will really depend on where you are. But if we stick specifically to Arab countries, I would say that the most accurate, but still abstract and high level, the distinction that you can make is you make it between societies that were established, or modern societies that were established using the ideology of Arab nationalism back in the decolonization era, 1950s primarily, and societies that never formally adopted Arab nationalism. So we're talking about, Arab nationalism would be all the republics. So Egypt, Syria, Iraq, Lebanon to a great extent, the Palestinians for sure, Sudan, those countries. So those countries are the first countries to modernize, and they modernized in the middle of the last century. They have probably the worst problem of anti-Semitism, because they adopted, during that moment of decolonization, they adopted a lot of German legacy, and that went in. That completely blended in. The fact that we know, it's a German legacy, and we can go and show like how this happened. It's important to know, but it really, sadly, doesn't change things in the street. That for most of the people, it's who they are. They think that this is Islam, this is Arabness, this is the fact that it came from Germany. Yeah. So those countries have the worst, as I said, like Egypt. Popularly, they do. They reject Israel completely still. You do have a few Arab monarchies that are also heavily influenced by this. Qatar is the foremost, and the reason is that Qatar adopted both Arab national. People always say that Qatar is Islamist. They are pro-Muslim Brotherhood. It's true, but they also pro-Arab nationalism. So Al Jazeera peddles both to the Arab world. And both of them
they
are
have. It depends
related.
where it's broadcasting. Yeah, it's
Yeah, and also, like, for example, you have Azmi Bishara. He was an Arab-Israeli Knesset member who was charged with espionage for Syria a few years ago, and he had to flee Israel. And he fled Israel, and he became an advisor to the Emir of Qatar. And he's an Arab nationalist. He's on TV saying there is no Palestinian nation. It's all Arabs. But he's also there. That's also Al Jazeera. And then you have the monarchies of the Arab Gulf that are never truly adopted this. Their main problem was religious fundamentalism proper. So Islamic religious fundamentalism with all its classical positions. It has Jew hatred, but it's different than the genocidal modern hatred for Jews. And people don't usually make the distinction, but the distinction is actually very, very important. So pre-modern religious or traditional anti-Semitism or Jew hatred, like Jews were contemptible, right? They are they are the subject of a lot of contempt, and you just want them on the side. I don't want them to see them in the, and walking next to me in the street. But it's not obsessed with a plan of world domination and the structure of power. I mean, this way of thinking is new. It's modern. Of course, It didn't exist. So they don't have that. And this is why I do believe that they now, as their own leaders, specifically the Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Saudi Arabia, are interested to become friendly to Israel and to Jewish people. It's actually easier for them to change that. I think it's easier to change or to deal with religious fundamentalism proper than to deal with modern ideologies. So those are kind of the two main distinctions.
Why do those kingdoms, if you could just crystallize that a little more?
Yeah.
Why are they willing to bridge this gap?
It's a lot of interests. After the Arab Spring, you have a lot of political instability. No, not just money. I mean, money is part of it for sure. But after, you have to look at what happened in the Arab Spring. What happened in the Arab Spring was a wave of destruction that threatened the entire region, threatened all societies and all political stability in the region. And they saw that. And they were the ones actually kind of putting the fire everywhere. So if you really go back to the history of the Arab Spring, you'll find that after the Arab Spring started, there was kind of this bloc that was formed, mainly led by the UAE and Saudi Arabia, that started to get heavily involved in the region, very interventionist, to kick the Muslim Brotherhood. They are the ones who helped kicking the Muslim Brotherhood out of Egypt. So they paid a lot of money. They lobbied the United States, the Obama administration. They had a lot of problems with the Obama administration at the time. So you have these issues of domestic.
The Obama administration actually likes the Brotherhood. They would love to be friends.
They wanted the Brotherhood. Iran is an element, and then all of this gives them or provided them with a motivation to develop the vision that now they all share, which is a new Middle East. We need a new Middle. Obviously, the old Middle East is not working. Our young people are not happy. They don't feel they are part of the world. They watch Netflix, and they see those, societies, whether in the West or whether, Japan and even Asian societies that are doing much better. People are open, people are free, there are much more economic development, much more opportunities, much livable and nicer cities. The people can go to concerts, and they are unhappy, and this is not sustainable. So they develop this vision to basically change, really to transform the region. It's very ambitious, but I think everybody who knows the region must be supportive of them. And of course, big part of that is to normalize with Israel in order to be able to create a functional economic and technological zone in the Middle East, but also in order to get out of the conflict mentality.
Right. Which, again, I mean, on paper, it's great. If we share some interests, why not?
Right.
The question, I think, on everybody's mind, on my mind at least, is where do we go from here in terms of anti-Semitism towards the Jews, and it's like, especially, what do you see in it? I mean, obviously you're involved. You're somewhat of an activist in that regard. You're not just, talking about the Middle East. You're not just observing it. You really have a desire to see this problem go away. So maybe you can say, tell us why I have a bunch of questions, but let's start with why do you want anti-Semitism to go away, and what do you think we should do to get rid of it?
Well, I listed a lot of my motivations at the beginning. I think the whole world's going to be better off. Are you talking about anti-Semitism in the Middle East specifically, or internationally?
Well, anywhere. We'll we'll take what we can.
We'll take what we can get.
I don't think you can get rid of it completely. I don't think you'll ever get rid of it, honestly.
Okay,
it's a sad realization, but that's my conviction. Because just the legacy of anti-Semitism, I think a big part of the problem, and a lot of people don't talk about this, it's just the legacy of anti-Semitism. And anti-Semitism is just one of those threads, continuous threads, that continued throughout a very important period of human history. I mean, 2,000 years, if you really want to start from the beginning of Christianity. And it's really got interwoven in all of our major traditions, theological traditions, philosophical traditions, ideological traditions, just the way you think, the way humans thought about reality. Anti-Semitism always had a place, and it created a legacy, a symbolic legacy. Think about all the, the cartoons from, let's say, 19th century and early 20th century Europe, right? And all of these publications, the Protocols of Zion, that now became, sadly, a human heritage. They are part of the human, and they will always be there. You'll never get rid of them, and that heritage will always has the potential of being rediscovered. And that's actually what's going on in America right now. I don't think it's like something that was latent, a seed, and then now it's coming out. No, it's a heritage that can get rediscovered. I think
it was always there. It was always there.
Hussein, is there a difference then? And this is kind of what we want to get to the bottom of. Is there a difference between Jew hatred, like anti-Semitism, and the difference between like the Shia Sunni conflict, which is also very, very strong and very, very complex.
Yeah.
But it's totally different. Well,
Totally
I'm
different.
wondering, is it totally different, or it's just we hate those people? Whatever the reasons are, we hate them. That some people here hate people because of the color of their skin. Some people hate because of this. Is there something unique about anti-Semitism? Is there something particular about this thing from others?
I do believe that anti-Semitism is different than all kinds of other discriminations or bigotry against other people. That anti-Semitism, as I said, it created a heritage right at the center of the most important human legacy. That is our theology and philosophy. That's really, it's the most celebrated human legacy because it has to do with our mind, has to do with the way we think. Anti-Semitism is problematic because it's right there. It does not, I don't believe that anti-Semitism starts from the uneducated, hicks in the street, the little ignorant guy who goes to the mosque. I actually don't think that's how it works. I think anti-Semitism almost always was the reverse. It started from the top in extremely complex theological and philosophical structures, and then it gets concretized in the bottom. And by the way, that's why. So you talked about like how American Jews and Israel have been dealing with anti-Semitism. I think that's one of their failure, especially American Jews, and that's my own criticism.
No, it's okay.
The way that they treated the history of the Holocaust and Nazism, they caricatured it, and they reduced the entire phenomenon of Nazism into white supremacy. And I think a lot of them were pushed towards that direction also by political developments in the United States. I think that was a terrible mistake. Nazism was the end of a long process, actually the most complicated philosophical process that came out of the Enlightenment. I mean, behind Nazi, in order to, let's say that you're somebody who actually went to go understand Nazism, you'll find yourself, you can't do it without understanding Heidegger and Nietzsche and Hegel and Kant and Herder and Fichte, and you have to basically understand German philosophy for 200 years prior in order to understand what Nazism thought to do. And you'll discover that white supremacy was a central element, but it was actually quite small in what else constituted that way of thinking.
By the way, we I think we mentioned it, Seth, in one of the podcasts, that Nazism is really it's an ingrained aspect of human development. It's almost like the next step if humanity doesn't do certain things, then every society advanced enough will all eventually get to Nazism. Capitalism can easily fall into. Germany was the most advanced country philosophically, economically at the time, and they ended up in like the darkest place. Not even talking about the Jews in particular, but just the attitude of like it's us against everyone else. And so we definitely agree that it's a much deeper process. And however, we also cover the just the attitudes of the Jews before the Holocaust, leading up to, and their attitude amongst themselves. And it was not a pretty one, by the way. The disunity among the Jews was
Hussein, let's look at that for a second. Having been around, forget about people out. Look at the Jews for a second critically. What do you see as the problem within the Jewish people that may lead to this phenomenon, this anti-Semitic phenomenon?
Well, hold on. Before you do that, maybe you can answer this question that we're asking everyone. What are Jews? What is this? What if aliens came and asked you, what is that group? What would you say?
The way I understand it's not necessarily true, but it's also a very difficult question. I think it's always going to be asked. But I think it's religion. It's God. That is, Jews are the ones who introduced monotheism, or high monotheism, ethical monotheism, to the world. The two major monotheistic civilizations that emerged in the last 2,000 years and truly led till this point are leading humanity. They both came out of Judaism, right? Christianity or Islam. People may say what they want about how those religions started, but they truly started as Jewish heresies.
No, of course.
And that means, and goes back to the idea that the legacy will always be there. How are you going to get rid of it? The main struggle of early Christianity, and with this, it's not really clear, but I suspect it was there, was to actually individuate out of Judaism, right? It's just to separate. You're coming out of Judaism, right? And then you have to separate from Judaism. So you're identifying yourself against it. I think it really started. That's a big element.
But that sounds like the you can characterize how it started, but Seth didn't come up with monotheism. Why is he still a Jew? You know what I mean? Why is Judaism still a thing? If it were just this, harbingers of this idea, okay, the idea is there. We're done. We can move on. There were many other empires. They rose, they fell, as Mark Twain says. But the Jews, for some reason, remain. Like as if there's like a certain something they have to fulfill. How like you they have the story like you keep coming back to this life. Almost like, why do you keep coming back? There's something I have to do. So what is the definition of Judaism today? After 2000
you got a
years?
twinkle in your eye when Leo asked this question.
No, I really don't know. I think the answer of this question will ultimately have to fall on some sort of faith, one or the other, whether religious or non-religious faith. Because you can't, once you're asking a question like this, you're dealing with the meaning of history. And the meaning of history, will always be a matter of either faith or philosophical speculation. I learned the very hard way that faith is always preferable to philosophical speculation. But I think that's always how it's going to be. So I don't want to speculate. That's basically why what I said.
Well, okay, so back to Seth's question. Looking at the Jews, we're just trying to kind of rephrase the discussion. Instead of saying anti-Semitism is their problem, something wrong with them, they have to change their mind. We're saying, okay, maybe something we did, something we didn't do. I don't know. Maybe there's something that we're is there something about the Jews in the world today that you can see, that you can say, well, maybe it's that, and we're not trying to, paint you as some anti-Jewish.
No, if you're talking about Jews themselves, like the actual people, not the abstraction. No, it's not them. The problem is with the abstraction. That's the thing.
So let's talk about the abstraction then.
It's a rational construct, but Jews.
But listen,
people,
you talked about Lord of the Rings, you talked about drama, you talked about,
The
we said
Matrix.
the Matrix, mysticism. So without, and I know you don't want to speculate,
right?
but let's go for 1 second and just allow ourselves to think that there are some kind of forces, there is some kind of master movie that we're all in. What would it be? What would have to happen? What is this?
I don't. I really.
Come on, give us the answer, Hussein.
We're hoping to solve this by 9 a.m. Come on.
Stop teasing us.
I'll tell you why I don't want to go into this. All right, because anti-Semitism always is tied to a question of meaning of history. Always, whether modern or, by the way, pre-modern. So you have to have it's embedded. So the Jew as an abstraction, Judaism as an abstraction, the ones that is a function in the anti-Semitic rational construct. That rational construct is a philosophy of history. It's a question about the meaning of history, right? And just the pitfalls. I mean, a lot of our disasters in this last century, whether it was Nazism or communism or Islamism or Arab nationalism, all of the major destructive ideology, they came out, the Hegelian philosophy. So they came out of a rational, a German philosophy of history. So that's why I am personally, that's because of this is why I understand things. I became paranoid, so to speak, about talking about history or the meaning in history. And I decided to accept religious faith about history as faith. And I feel that's also the safest, because by the end of the day, it's faith, right? I believe that there is a God, there's a plan. I don't know what the plan is, but it's there. And I trust that there is a meaning to all of this. So that's my own personal position.
So there's something in so it's whatever the mind does, which you can study and read about it in books, there's something in the heart that drives it all. I mean, that's every epic drama.
Right.
It's not because somebody studied what is love and how is love. There's
Definitely
something
not.
that drives you to go to battle and fight a dragon. There's something that in your heart that makes you go and climb that mountain. Yeah.
No, it's true. Study and learning, while they are very, very important, but I do not believe that by the end of the day they can reveal meaning, give meaning to life of an individual or of a group. I personally study a lot, not to learn, but mostly to unlearn. That's honestly, I read most of the books that I have. This room is filled with books, are books actually that I don't like, that I learned not to trust. And that's why I'm reading. I'm reading in order to know, okay, what not to trust. Okay, obviously he thinks, well, like Yuval Harari, right? He makes this huge rational system that gives meaning to life, and they are cartoons of reality. I feel personal indignation and insult for the people who actually believe this. And he doesn't know. I mean, we don't even know half of what he claims. I wouldn't even say half. We don't know 10% of half of what he claims that we actually know as people. So that's why I learned to know, not to trust.
Okay, so this is good. So we like skeptics on our show. So let's work with what we see. What's actually tangible in front of our eyes. We look at nature and we see a lot of individual particles that have no business being together, somehow finding their way to be together. Right? Starts with the universe. You could have had just a cloud of stuff. No, you find aggregations of things, right? You find planets, solar systems, galaxies. You find things kind of get together. But then, it could have stayed there. But no, somehow, for some reason that maybe we can't explain right now using the time that we have, but these, long processes on the inanimate level, on the still level, suddenly produce a new kind of relationship between these same dead particles, right? The same atoms suddenly bring about vegetation. And then this process repeats itself. Higher degrees of order, more freedom, so to speak, to that individual creature that emerged, the tree, the whatever. Still a lot of limitation, but a more complex relationship with the environment, with other elements from its species. and then everything could have stayed this way, and no, yet you see this other emergence, right? This animal kingdom emerging from the vegetative level, right? Suddenly, a higher degree of order. These same elements suddenly connect in an even more complex way, not just stems and stalks and leaves, but suddenly you have like intricate tubing systems and nerves and tissue and organs, right? All those things. The same seemingly improbable relationships appear, and they kind of demand a more of a interaction, more relationships. The individual has greater degrees of freedom, and yet it is still impacted by the environment it lives in, and the process continues, and you suddenly have a new emergence of the speaking human, right? Again, could have remained monkeys. There was no reason to think about it for nature to evolve, right? There's no practical reason that we can see. Like, let's just stay monkeys. It would have been great, There's no, big monkey wars. Yes, sticks and stones, but everything is much simpler. Got bananas, you chill. You can have everything that humans do anyways, right? Food, sex, family, great. Some, hierarchical, gossip and power struggle. It's great. We could have had everything. No, nature creates an even more complex system, right? A more complex aggregation.
Nature is very progressive.
In that sense, it is. However, that progression always gets into more and more higher degrees of order, right? Higher degrees of connection between the elements. Right. And when you look at this element, when you look at this, I see very interesting systems that are influenced, that are defined by the way they relate to one another. Cells relate one way; we call them muscle cells. They relate another way; we call them neurons, and so on and so forth. And the best thing of all of it is somehow it gives rise, or it allows to, or whatever you want to call it, this to happen: conversations, thinking, consciousness, and even beyond. What we're saying, the simple thing behind what our construct is, what if we participated in that process and connected these individual individual nodes in the system that have become kind of solid nodes, people? What if we connect them in a way that's beyond anything, right?
No, you can definitely, and I feel you should. I mean, that's really part of having kind of a benevolent goal in life, that you're trying to help yourself and everybody else.
It's not even about benevolence. It's just simply about how systems work. They did the study of scale-free networks, and you see that the network undergoes this transition, and when a critical kind of tipping point is crossed, and all individual nodes they become one entity. They become a node in a higher system. Why?
No, we should. My own skepticism is skepticism of the ability of human rationality to truly, first of all, conceptualize social change fully, and to be able to fully control it in any way. That is. And that's the problem with dogmatic ideologies. That's what the communists tried to do. They thought, as I said, it's the philosophy of history. So Marx wrote, like, listen, I figured it out. This is how history happened, and this is what's going to happen. So basically, we're just going to go there. We're going to get to socialism and communism. And people said, okay, you know what? That sounds great. Let's do it. And you got unbelievable miseries.
Right.
So I think you have to always mitigate that. And religious faith as well. You have to always mitigate them with some healthy sense of skepticism of your own ability, at least, to really fully understand where you're supposed to go.
We have an answer to that. It has to feel right. Seth will tell you, when you go into a family, that you feel the love of the family. End of story. Nobody needs to teach you about how you interconnect and interrelate, and that you have, your mother has brain cells from your body when you're in her belly. And I don't care about that stuff. I just feel it. That's what we want to get to. And basically, our whole premise says maybe there's a group of people that can help bring that. Not Jews, but in their passport. Jew from the word unity. Anyone who feels that can be part of it. Can be an imaginal cell in this transformation from a caterpillar to a butterfly. Can be a hormone cell, right, in that body that has to go through puberty. That's what we're saying.
And all this unlearning that you talked about from all of these books, in a sense, it's why we had communism and why we had Nazism and these things. So we understand, so we can feel that won't our solution won't come from those things.
Yeah.
It's like you have to try it in order to know. And so it's pretty clear to us, although we see that not everyone got the lessons of history. There's some great memes about that. It's like, comrade, why are you playing, stop playing your video games. He's like, comrade, I thought after the revolution we would just get, Netflix and video games. It's like,
Yeah.
No,
No,
but
it's true. Yeah. Nobody learns from the lessons of history. Not a lot of people, at least. Yeah.
No, it's slow. I mean, that's how it is. Even my body is 90% just dumb flesh, you could say. But what you need it.
But it seems that the real, I have to use the mind, but it seems that through all of these Kanye's, Ye's, and Karl Marx's, and Hegel, and Hitler's, and all these things, and Muftis, and whoever, that we'll feel in our heart at some point, hopefully, or feel where we need to go. We'll feel that is not working for me. That is not
that's
working.
dangerous too, by the way. Like that too. I'm sorry to be such a
no.
No, but
we want to have honest conversations here.
No,
so.
that's also dangerous. I mean, I'm pretty sure that Kanye West was a multi-billionaire. I know a multi-billionaire, a billionaire, but he's definitely richer than the three of us and our families combined. At least I don't know how about you both. But and the guy feels aggrieved. I mean, you watch him; he actually feels it. Like he feels he is a victim. He feels that the Jews took something from, and he feels it. And in the lingo of today, we'll say like it's his truth, right? That's how he passionately feels. And you meet a lot of, I meet Arab Israelis. I met this Arab Israeli woman. It really drove me nuts. She has a better life than the vast majority of women in the Muslim and Arab world, right? She lives in Israel. She lives in Tel Aviv.
And let me guess, she complains.
Oh, yeah. You have no idea. She apparently travel from Israel to Europe is very cheap. So goes to Europe like 3 times a year just to have fun and take pictures for Instagram. She's really having a bliss. And then I meet her and she with real deep grievance against Israel that tortures us and hates us and oppresses us. And I was like, you're like in Europe 3 times a year. What oppression are you talking about? But she genuinely acquired that feeling. So as that's how hard it is, I think, to be human in general.
No, you're right.
Also can be deceptive.
We talk about mass psychosis, absolutely, and we understand the mechanisms of that, by the way, and they were also clearly defined by another Jew. We have a great episode on that as well.
Right.
Point being that obviously the feeling has to be checked by the mind. The mind has to be checked by the feeling. It's always a balance, as we said in the very beginning. It has to be a balance. The question is, and this is really what we kind of want to end on, because again, we can talk, I feel like, much more.
Yeah, this is a good connection here.
Yeah, we haven't even gotten into Lord of the Rings, like, for real.
That's true. Yeah, I love Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, it's but not the series is fine, but just the original trilogy. But I guess what we're trying to get at, the mechanisms of how this change needs to come. Yes, we need to talk about it. There's no question. But the way for us to check that those feelings are moving in the right direction is to look at nature. For someone to say, oh, I feel oppressed, but nature or what your eyes see is that it's not the case, there's a dissonance, that's not good. We need to move beyond that. But when the direction should be towards greater human connection, towards somehow rising above differences, not equalizing them, not artificially erasing them, but rising above them, seeking, demanding this togetherness, that's what nature does. That's how nature forms system all the time. So that's why we feel like we have the feeling has to be right and has to go like this, has to be rising above differences. And with the question to you is like, how do you feel about that, about being part of that kind of, move to a higher, level of being?
Thank you. I don't know if I am. I hope I am. But I just it feels, actually it sucks most of the time, but it's worth it when you see it work. And I'm sure that you both feel the same way, because really it sucks most of the time, because most of the time you're frustrated because like there's so much deception and lies and stupidity out there. So it's very frustrating. But the moments when it works, the moment that you see that actually maybe you help somebody to think about something better, it's actually the entire thing is worth it. And by the end of the day, I think individuals that's how change happens. That's what really exists. It's people as individuals. And that's why cultivating people's characters, people's ability to think clearly, and to really and feel, also their own humanity and the humanity of others is what matters.
Hussein, it's so fun to talk to you, and I feel like we like left 5 doors that we could have gone in and and opened
Thank
up
you.
a lot more. I hope we have a chance to open up some of these again. It's a fascinating journey that you're on, and it's such a transformational, such a historic. I'm like you. I feel so often like I'm in this epic movie. I think it's probably why people like us are on this journey and doing this kind of thing, because it does feel dramatic, historical, epic, and that we're taking place in this big story that has some, and we know that there's got to be a good ending.
Yeah. And by the way, that's a Jewish idea in its own. Like, that's actually one of the biggest contributions of Judaism to the world. It's, you're living in a big story. You might not know what's going on, and you might not know the intent of the author, but you just should trust it. And that's I learned through many years that this is actually the best way at least for me personally, this is the best way to think about this.
Awesome, Hussein. Wow. Well, that's sadly all the time that we got. It's been great to have Hussein with us. I hope that we can have you again. As Seth said, our door is open, our circle is open. We love to, everyone who comes here, we're basically like, okay, you're part of the circle. So by all means, feel free to reach out, and also anyone watching, like, share, comment, subscribe, click the bell, whatever you need to do to feel part of this circle. This is the Jew function, and hopefully it's the Jew function from the unity function, the function that strives to rise above and find that higher dimension of living. This is who we are, and that's what we're trying to do. And we'll see everyone next on our next talk.
Thanks.
Take care.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. That was great. Hopefully do it again.
Yes.